Something is moving through the dry woodland. The grass trembles first. Then the animal emerges, low to the ground, heavily built, its long tail sweeping behind it, its head carried forward with the deliberate confidence of a predator that has little reason to hurry. For a moment, the landscape seems almost ordinary. Then the scale becomes clear. This is not a modern goanna. It is Megalania, Varanus priscus, one of the largest terrestrial lizards known to have existed. And somewhere in the Australian Pleistocene, this giant monitor once moved through a world filled with animals that have disappeared from Earth. There is no living observer to tell us exactly how it hunted. No complete skeleton survives to show us every detail of its body. Much of its life remains hidden in fragments of bone and tooth. But those fragments tell us enough to enter its world. And in that world, this reptile stood near the top of the food chain. More than 40,000 years ago, Australia was not the continent we know today. Its climate was changing. Its landscapes ranged from open woodland and forest to grassier environments, with rivers, lakes, caves, and dry interior country spread across an enormous landmass. Megalania fossils have been found across much of eastern and southern Australia, including Queensland, New South Wales, Victoria, and parts of South Australia.
Across these
the remains are scattered.
Landscapes.
A vertebra here, a tooth there, a fragment of jaw, a limb bone. And because no complete skeleton or intact skull has ever been recovered, even the exact appearance of this animal remains partly reconstructed. But the pieces are enough to reveal something extraordinary. This was a monitor lizard built on a scale that no living Australian lizard approaches. Estimates of its size have varied considerably. Some reconstructions have produced animals more than 5 meters long, with very large individuals estimated at several hundred kilograms. That makes Megalania an animal whose body alone could transform an ordinary encounter into a dangerous one. Its skull was heavily constructed. Its teeth were curved and adapted for tearing flesh. Small bony structures called osteoderms were embedded in parts of its skin, forming a kind of natural armor. The body would have been carried by strong limbs, while the long tail provided balance and probably contributed significantly to movement. But size was not the only advantage. Megalania belonged to the monitor lizard family, and living monitors give us a glimpse into the kind of sensory world their extinct relative may have inhabited. Modern monitor lizards possess keen vision, a strong sense of smell, and a forked tongue that collects chemical particles from the environment and transfers them to a specialized sensory organ in the roof of the mouth. We cannot directly observe Megalania doing the same, but its anatomy places it within the same evolutionary group. So somewhere among the Pleistocene trees, scent may have been as important as sight. A trail left in the soil, the smell of an injured animal, the presence of another predator, the remains of a carcass hidden beyond the vegetation. For a large monitor, the landscape itself could carry information, and Megalania had plenty of landscape to explore. Its fossils occur in very different environments. Some were found in stream and river deposits. Others came from caves. But these locations do not necessarily mean the animal lived beside water or inside caves. The fossil record is often a record of where bones ended up, not a perfect map of where an animal spent every hour of its life. What we can say is that Megalania occupied a broad range of Pleistocene habitats. It was not confined to one narrow corner of Australia. It was a widespread predator in a continent already crowded with enormous animals. Imagine moving through that landscape at ground level. A wallaby-sized animal disappears into the grass. Birds lift from a clearing. The vegetation shifts in the wind. Nothing moves for several seconds. Then the giant lizard advances. There is no evidence that Megalania relied on spectacular high-speed chases. Its body tells us something different. A massive monitor would have carried enormous weight. Energy mattered. Every failed pursuit would cost more than a successful ambush. So, based on what is known about its relatives and anatomy, scientists have considered Megalania a possible ambush predator and scavenger. That distinction matters. It may not have needed to chase every meal. It could potentially have waited, approached cautiously, or exploited an animal that was already weakened. The fossil record provides clues about what it may have eaten. Megalania remains have been found alongside the fossils of large animals, including kangaroos. Living giant monitors are capable of taking substantial prey, and this has helped inform reconstructions of Megalania's diet. But there is an important boundary between evidence and imagination. We cannot point to a fossil and say that we watched Megalania kill a particular animal. We cannot know exactly how often it hunted, how far it traveled, or how it approached prey. Those details are lost. What the evidence does show is that this giant lizard possessed the anatomy of a large terrestrial predator and lived among animals large enough to provide substantial meals. And once a predator reaches this size, food becomes both opportunity and problem. A large carcass can sustain an enormous meal, but finding that carcass is never guaranteed. Australia's Pleistocene ecosystems were not endless fields of prey. Drought could alter water availability. Vegetation could change. Large herbivores could move across wide areas in search of food. For Megalania, survival would have depended not simply on strength, but on finding enough energy without spending too much of it. This is one reason scavenging may have been important. A carcass already provides what a predator otherwise has to spend energy obtaining, and a monitor lizard is equipped for a world where meals may arrive unpredictably. Its powerful jaws and flesh-cutting teeth could process meat. Its large body could store energy, and unlike a mammalian predator of similar mass, a giant reptile would have had different metabolic demands. The Australian Museum notes that Megalania may have needed substantially less food than a mammalian predator of comparable size. But the largest predator in an ecosystem is never completely safe. There are other predators. There are competitors. There are animals capable of injuring even a creature this large. And there is one threat no body armor can completely defeat: another Megalania. The fossil record tells us very little about its social life. We do not know whether adults regularly tolerated one another. We do not know whether they defended territories. We do not know how they communicated. We do not know how males and females behaved outside reproduction. The safest reconstruction is therefore a cautious one. Megalania should not be imagined as living in organized groups, simply because some modern animals do. Nor should it automatically be portrayed as permanently aggressive toward every animal it encountered. Its social behavior remains largely unknown. What we can reconstruct with greater confidence is the pressure created by its lifestyle. A giant predator needs space. It needs food. And wherever food is concentrated, competition follows. A carcass would not belong to one animal simply because the first predator reached it. Other carnivores could arrive. Smaller scavengers could gather, and another giant monitor could represent a serious rival. Those osteoderms embedded in the skin may have offered some protection during physical encounters. But armor is not invulnerability. A bite, a damaged limb, or a serious injury could turn a successful predator into a starving one. For a reptile this large, recovery may have been a slow process, and the most vulnerable stage of all would have come before adulthood. Somewhere in the ancient landscape, smaller Megalania must have existed. We know this because fossils include remains interpreted as juveniles. But beyond that, the story becomes uncertain. There is no direct evidence telling us how young were raised. No confirmed nesting colony. No fossil record showing a mother guarding hatchlings. No reliable evidence proving long-term parental care. Living monitor lizards show a wide range of reproductive strategies, but we cannot simply copy the behavior of a modern species onto Megalania. So the young animal enters our reconstruction alone, small compared with the adults, surrounded by dangers, and growing toward a future in which its body itself becomes a weapon. For a juvenile, almost everything would be a potential threat. Food would be harder to secure, shelter would matter, and larger predators could turn the balance instantly. Survival would mean reaching adulthood, because once Megalania became enormous, very few animals could challenge it directly. That transformation, from vulnerable young reptile to giant predator, would have been one of the most important journeys in its life. But the journey required time, and time was becoming dangerous for Australia's megafauna. The Pleistocene was already a period of major environmental change. Australia experienced shifts in climate, rainfall, and vegetation. The continent became increasingly dry and variable through parts of the later Pleistocene. These changes did not affect every species in the same way. Some animals adapted, some moved, some declined, and some disappeared. Megalania belonged to an ecological community that was gradually being dismantled. Then another species entered the story. Humans,
weighing up to 3 tons,
the first people reached
Megalania moves
the
with
combined
a slow,
ice age
deliberate
landmass
gait,
of Australia
a true
and New
apex
Guinea,
predator of the
at least
Pleistocene
around
epoch.
50,000 years ago. And eventually, humans and giant monitor lizards occupied the same continent. For decades, this overlap has been central to the debate over the disappearance of Australia's megafauna. It is tempting to imagine a simple story. Humans arrive. The giant animals disappear. Therefore, humans must have killed them. But the evidence is more complicated. A study of giant monitor fossils from the MT Etna region found evidence that humans and giant monitors did overlap in time. That makes human impact possible. But the researchers also stressed how sparse the fossil record remains and cautioned against treating the evidence as proof of a precise extinction date or a single cause. This distinction matters. We do not know that people hunted Megalania to extinction. We do not know that burning landscapes caused its disappearance. We do not know that climate change alone destroyed its habitat. And we do not know exactly when the last individual died. The disappearance of Australia's megafauna remains a complex scientific question, with evidence pointing toward different combinations of environmental and human pressures in different regions. But imagine what those pressures would mean for a giant predator. A changing landscape can reduce prey. A reduction in large herbivores can remove the energy base supporting a large carnivore. More frequent disturbance can reshape vegetation. Changing water availability can alter where animals gather. And a predator near the top of the food web has nowhere higher
yet the
to
landscape
retreat.
remains
When
silent.
its prey disappear,
The giant
the problem
monitors
travels
vanished.
upward. Megalania may have survived changes that smaller animals could not. But resilience has limits. The giant monitor had evolved for a particular Australia. An Australia filled with enormous marsupials, large birds, giant reptiles, huge herbivores. A landscape where a very large predator could find very large meals. As that community changed, the advantage of enormous size could begin to work against it. A smaller predator can survive on smaller prey. A giant predator cannot shrink itself overnight. Its body demands energy even when the landscape becomes poorer. And so the same adaptation that once made Megalania formidable may have become a burden. There may have been no single final battle, no dramatic moment when the species suddenly vanished. Extinction is often quieter than that. One generation survives, then another. The range becomes smaller. The opportunities become fewer. Young animals fail to reach adulthood often enough. Populations become increasingly scattered. And eventually, somewhere in Australia, a final Megalania dies. There is no fossil that we can confidently identify as the last individual. No final footprint. No witness. Only absence. After millions of years of evolution, an animal that had occupied Australia's
From these
landscapes
scattered fragments,
as a major
we
predator became something found only in stone. Its teeth stopped cutting flesh. Its enormous body stopped moving through the woodland. Its tracks disappeared beneath later sediments, and the landscapes continued without it. The rivers kept flowing. The forests changed. The grasslands shifted. Other predators survived. Other lizards remained. But the giant monitor was gone. Today,
This fossil
the evidence of its
represents the
existence
Megalania,
can fit
a
into
giant
museum
monitor.
drawers and carefully protected collections. A fragment of jaw, a tooth, a vertebra, a limb bone, pieces that seem small compared with the animal they once belonged to. Yet from those fragments, scientists can reconstruct the outline of a lost world. They can estimate its size, study its anatomy, compare its bones with living monitors, trace where its fossils were found, and ask how an animal so extraordinary could once have been part of an ordinary Australian ecosystem. The answers are incomplete, and that uncertainty is important. Megalania is not a creature we can simply invent a life for. Its true story must remain tied to the evidence. We know it was a giant monitor. We know it lived during the Pleistocene. We know it occupied broad areas of Australia. We know it had the anatomy of a formidable carnivorous reptile. We know it existed among some of the largest animals ever to inhabit the continent. And we know that eventually it disappeared. Everything beyond those foundations must be reconstructed carefully. Perhaps that is what makes Megalania so compelling. Not because we can know every detail, but because we cannot. There are moments in its story that will forever remain beyond our reach. We will never watch one emerge from the trees, never hear its footsteps, never see it investigate a carcass, never know exactly how it courted, nested, hunted, rested, or defended itself. The animal is silent now, but its bones are not. They tell us that Australia once supported a predator unlike anything alive there today, a reptile large enough to share a landscape with giant kangaroos and other vanished creatures, a creature that survived environmental change for thousands upon thousands of years, a creature that occupied the top of an ancient food web, and then slowly or suddenly, depending on the region and the pressures involved, its world changed beyond recovery. The last Megalania did not know it was the last. It would have searched for food, moved through its territory, avoided danger, rested, survived one day, and then another, just as its ancestors had done, until one generation failed to produce the next, and the enormous shadow that had once crossed the Australian landscape became nothing more than a memory written in fragments of bone. For a time, Megalania ruled a continent that no longer exists. Then the landscape changed, the animals changed, and eventually the giant disappeared. But buried beneath Australian soil, its remains still carry the same message. The past was not empty, it was alive with giants, and among them moved a lizard so extraordinary that even after tens of thousands of years, its shadow still seems to cross the ancient landscape.